Sports fans love a good villain. The kind of player who lives for trash talk, rough play, and stirring up chaos on and off the court. But some NBA bad boys have crossed the line, turning their competitive fire into something far darker. From violent outbursts to off-court scandals, their stories are as shocking as they are unforgettable. These are the most evil players in NBA history. First up, we have Karl Malone, the two-time NBA MVP winner who became a legend for the Utah Jazz between 1985 and 2003. Malone earned the nickname the Mailman because he always delivered, and whilst he was a reliable pair of hands, he also delivered his fair share of controversy. Yes, he knew how to find his way to the basket and was pretty damn good at stopping his opponents from finding theirs, but he was also incredibly reliable for cheap shots, and nobody was safe from his elbows. The Mailman was as imposing as they come on the court, standing at 6'9" and weighing 260 pounds. He entered the league as the 13th overall pick in 1985, selected by the Jazz, and wasted no time establishing himself as one of the league's most exciting forwards. His rookie season produced 14.9 points and 8.9 rebounds per game, and by his second season, he was already averaging over 20 points a game. The guy took to the NBA like a duck to water, going on to produce 14 All-Star selections and 2 MVP awards, whilst also finishing his career as the NBA's second all-time leading scorer with 36,928 points. He's since been bumped down to third by a certain LeBron James. The production was off the charts, and Karl Malone spent almost 2 decades as one of the NBA's most imposing players. Not just because you knew he could take over any game at any time, but because he used his huge frame to physically intimidate his opponents, and he had no problems producing collateral damage. His most egregious on-court incident occurred in 1991 against the Detroit Pistons. With the ball in hand, the Pistons' Isaiah Thomas dribbled into the paint and was about to take flight for the basket, only to find a big Karl Malone in the way, attempting to block the shot, elbow first. Thomas was stopped dead in his tracks, blood instantly gushing from his forehead. Malone barely moved. It was the dirtiest of moves, and Malone was duly punished, with the NBA suspending him for the next game without pay and fining him $10,000. He received another fine of the same amount in 1999 for elbowing Brian Grant. He was a true menace, and somebody you didn't want to get too close to if you could help it. Whilst his reputation on the court was one of being a dirty player, his reputation off it took an even deeper dive when an even more serious allegation emerged. A tabloid newspaper called The Globe reported in 1998 that Karl Malone had been a defendant in paternity suits that were filed shortly after he entered the NBA. It was alleged that he was the father of 2 twins that were born when he was 17 and another child that was born when he was 20. However, the child he allegedly fathered at the age of 20 was born to a 13-year-old girl who would have been 12 years old at the time she became pregnant. Whilst no criminal charges were filed, the court of public opinion certainly came down hard on Malone. The paternity cases were settled out of court, but Malone's refusal to take responsibility or provide support drew significant criticism and stained his already tainted image. One of the craziest things about this story is that the vast majority of people were completely unaware of it until the back end of Malone's career, but as more and more found out, his reputation as one of the most evil NBA players would only grow stronger. Since his retirement, he has managed to foster a relationship with all 3 of his children, admitting that "I didn't handle it right, I was wrong. Father Time is the biggest thief that's out there, and you can't get that back." The next evil player on our list is Metta Sandiford-Artest, previously known as Ron Artest, and now known as one of the most chaotic characters in basketball. Artest was a cocktail of brilliance and recklessness brought into the league by the Chicago Bulls, who selected him 16th in the 1999 draft. As a rookie, Artest hit the ground running, playing his way into the NBA All-Rookie Second Team thanks to his 12 points, 2.3 turnovers, and 1.7 steals per game. He was a top-tier defender, but offensive struggles led to him being traded away from the Bulls to the Indiana Pacers in the 2001-2002 season. As a Pacer, Artest improved significantly, increasing his points per game tally to 18.3 in 2003-2004, whilst maintaining a very impressive 2.1 steals and 2.8 turnovers per game. These fine numbers earned him the Defensive Player of the Year award, and he also would go on to add 2 All-Defensive First Team selections and an NBA All-Star selection before winning the championship with the LA Lakers in 2010. 19 years in the NBA tells you all that you need to know about how effective Artest was on the court, but there were certainly a few blemishes on his resume over that impressive stretch of time. In his first season as a Pacer, he was suspended for 4 games for flashing an obscene gesture at the crowd. This came after he had gotten into an argument and made contact with Miami Heat coach Pat Riley and taunted his bench. That capped off a busy and expensive period for Artest, who had been ejected for fighting Dallas's Raja Bell just a few weeks earlier, and in that same month had been fined and suspended 3 games for smashing up a TV camera after a game. His most famous incident, though, came against the Detroit Pistons in 2004. In fact, it was such a big incident that it even got its own name: Malice at the Palace. The whole thing kicked off when Artest fouled Pistons center Ben Wallace, who retaliated by giving him a push. This lifted tensions and triggered a shoving match between players, during which Artest calmly lay on the scorer's table, not so subtly mocking his opponents. Shoving matches are nothing new in sports, and things were seemingly about to calm down, only for one fan to send things into chaos. Whilst lying on the table, Artest was struck by a drink from the crowd, and without thinking, he jumped across the boards and grabbed the fan that he thought had doused him. It turns out it was a case of mistaken identity, but that didn't matter. It was too late. By now, players and fans alike were swinging freely, trying to unleash their anger on anyone they could get their hands on. It took 90 minutes to get the game back underway, confirming this as one of the most violent and shocking incidents in NBA history. For his role in the brawl, Artest received a whopping 86-game suspension, which is the longest ever given for an on-court incident. He wasn't the only one, though, with a total of 146 games worth of suspensions being handed out to players involved. Artest lost approximately $5 million in earnings, whilst also etching his name into the history books for all the wrong reasons. The list of shocking incidents doesn't stop there, though. In the first round of the 2012 playoffs, World Peace, as he had recently changed his name to, was celebrating a dunk, and in the process, clattered a lethal elbow into the side of James Harden's head. The unprovoked attack was one of the dirtiest plays seen on the basketball court, giving Harden a concussion and earning Artest a 7-game suspension and $430,000 worth of more fines. It wasn't just on the court that Artest crossed a line, though. He also faced significant legal issues off it, most notably for a domestic violence incident in 2007. The case against him claimed that he had shoved his wife to the floor several times and prevented her from calling 911, resulting in 10 days in jail and a good chunk of community service. He also had to relinquish ownership of his dog because of malnutrition and neglect. It's fair to say that Metta Sandiford-Artest is one of the more evil players to step foot on the basketball court, but he has since settled down into married life and has expressed remorse for his actions. Whilst the 2 players we have already discussed enjoyed long and successful careers, our next evil NBA player certainly did not. Tom Payne looked set for greatness, dominating in his first seasons at the college level thanks to his 7'2" frame that helped him average 16.9 points and 10 rebounds per game. That effort came in the 1970-71 season, in which Payne earned a reputation as one of the most exciting players in the nation, regularly landing over 30 points on his opponents en route to helping Kentucky clinch an SEC title in 1971. Despite his dominance, that one brilliant season would be all that Payne got to enjoy at college. You see, whilst he was racking up the points, he was also earning a reputation as one of the dirtiest players in college basketball. Not once, but twice he was ejected against Tennessee, flagrantly fouling Jim Woodall in both games, one of which saw him flip Woodall head over heels when he was going for a rebound. He was ejected yet again against Alabama for arguing against a referee's decision, and he got in even more serious trouble when he was caught speeding over the summer break in his flashy new Cadillac. In addition to constantly getting into trouble, Tom Payne was also not delivering in the classroom, and with incomplete grades threatening to keep him off the court in the 1971-72 season, he instead opted to head straight for the NBA. It was a messy and incomplete college resume, but his physical prowess and production in one season at Kentucky meant that teams were still enamored by his potential. He was drafted by the Atlanta Hawks under the NBA's hardship rule, which allowed players to enter the league early if they could prove they were suffering from financial hardship. This particular rule worked out well for Payne, but but it would end up being a disaster for the Hawks. Across his first 29 games, Tom Payne averaged a measly 4.1 points and 2.4 rebounds per game. There were signs that the 7'2" center might have been a bust of a selection, which was fully confirmed in 1972, when legal issues took Payne off the court altogether. Having been in the NBA for just under a year, Payne was arrested on rape charges. Whilst it took until 1972 for the law to put their clamps on Payne, this was not the first he had heard of the allegations. Payne was first approached about the incident on the very morning that he was set to travel to Atlanta to join the Hawks. He had been recognized in the paper by the victim. However, he was not retained for questioning, as the police report listed the attacker as 6'3" and not the 7'2" that Payne stood at. At the second time of asking, Payne was convicted of 2 accounts of rape and served 5 years in jail in Georgia. His time behind bars was not over though, as Payne then spent a further 6 years in jail in Kentucky for separate rape charges before being paroled in 1983. This marked the end of 11 years in jail, but they didn't appear to have made a difference to the dark streak in Tom Payne, as he was later convicted on a separate rape charge in 1986 after his initial release from prison. He was paroled in California in 2000, but his time in jail was still not done, as he was sent back to Kentucky prison for yet another stint behind bars, this time for a parole violation. It was one thing after another for Tom Payne, whose nasty streak in college evolved into a dark and dangerous string of attacks in later life. He may only have played 1 season in the NBA, but he is definitely one of the most evil players in its history. So, which of these players do you think was the most evil, and who have I missed? Let me know in the comments.